Every time I go to a horse sale, I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to find. Typically, I like to peruse the loose pen, which means these horses and mules will sell with no information given on them. I try my best to evaluate each one to see if they have any problems. I'm really searching for those horses that might find themselves in an unfortunate situation. I check their eyes, I look at their feet. I also try and take a look at what is going on inside their mouths. When the auction starts, I typically have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to be bidding on, but every once in a while there'll be a horse that comes into the ring that I have no intentions of bidding on, and somehow I'll still end up with the horse on my trailer at the end of the day. 2 years ago, I purchased one of those horses. When this little girl came into the ring, the auctioneer called and called, but nobody bid on her. Even though I knew she was a wild horse, I decided to take a chance on her and ended up getting her for only $25. These wild horses can be extremely dangerous. Typically, they have never seen a human before they make it to the sale. Horses like this little girl have a little bit of a precarious spot out in the wild. There are a lot of free roaming horses in the western United States. When these horses land on federally protected land, they are managed by the Bureau of Land Management. Judging by her paperwork, my filly came off of the Crow Reservation, which does manage its wild horses a lot differently. In Montana, there is actually only one herd management area that is overseen by the Bureau of Land Management. The Pryor Mountain horses are well known. Some of them have even been turned into Breyer horses. When they do come up for sale, they are some of the few that sell for big bucks on the online auctions. Had my filly been born just one mountain range to the east, she would have been underneath the BLM's protection. Reservation horses are typically gathered and then sold at auction to the highest bidder. When I finally got this girl home, I thought the $25 investment was well worth it. Although she was pretty fractious, she did have very good conformation, which can be tricky to find in a reservation horse. In addition to the blood of wild horses, they also have some domestic blood mixed in. I let her just hang out for a week and then I started right in on her training. These wild horses are extremely fractious typically. Even if you only pay a few dollars for them, they are a huge time commitment. Thankfully, this girl had a little bit of sense to her and I was able to teach her how to stand still for me to touch her with my stick. I was also able to get just a plain cotton rope around her neck to begin to teach her how to come to pressure. Unfortunately, when sent to auction, these wild horses do get exposed to a lot of pathogens. This mare did blow an abscess right through one of the suture lines in her skull. Since at this point she was still basically unhandled, I did have to treat her with oral antibiotics and anti-inflammatories. Due to her age, she was getting a milk replacer pellet to help her stay strong as she fought off her infection. Since I do live in Montana, the weather can change at any moment in the fall. I work with a lot of unhandled horses and sometimes you just have to make do with what you have at the time. With a pretty severe storm looming, I had to move this girl across the parking lot and drop her off into the barn. With the door secured, I finally had her in a stall. Once she was healthy and done with her quarantine, I was able to introduce her to a friend. I was also able to start back in on her training. The winter can be really brutal, but this girl grew an amazing winter coat. I have worked with quite a few BLM Mustangs and this little girl really wasn't too different. She did experience some reoccurring abscesses that made myself and the vet very nervous for a while. We put her on a second round of some heavy-duty antibiotics. Eventually, the hematoma on her rear end and her ankle seemed to clear up just fine. 2 months after I bought her, this girl finally started to settle in and enjoy the touch of a human. During the coldest part of the winter, it is extremely hard to get any horses worked. Since this little filly did get the go-ahead from the vet to continue her work, I did start back in on her halter training. Due to her incredibly thick winter coat, however, she did begin to sweat during some of our sessions. Since she was a pretty scared and fractious horse to begin with, I didn't want to make any of her training experiences uncomfortable for her, so I went ahead and gave her the winter off. I dialed in her nutrition program. She got some vitamin E, some flaxseed oil, and by the time winter was about over, she started investigating me and opening up her mind a little bit more. After having this girl for around 6 months is when I really got started in seriously with her halter training. I know for some people that may seem like a really long time to put it off, but since this girl did have so many medical problems and issues in the beginning, I think she just needed to relax. It was really nice to rely on some of the other horses to teach this girl manners in a herd. Since she was taken from her mother way before she ever should have been weaned, it was part of her development that was lacking. I decided to call this girl Scarlet because of her fiery red coat. Although I hadn't been able to brush her yet, I knew that in the springtime, when this nasty long hair shed out, that she was going to be a gorgeous copper penny color. Throughout her halter training, I used techniques that I had used in the past on Mustangs. While Scarlet had grown to be quite outgoing and a little bit more brave than when she got here, she still had trouble accepting a few really scary parts of this process. Despite being hyper aware and extra flighty about most things, this girl did have a pretty good brain between her ears. Eventually, it really warmed up here and I was able to start desensitizing this horse with water. This is one of my favorite tools to use when you can't actually go up and touch a horse consistently with your hands. You can stay pretty far away from them and also desensitize them to things touching them. A bonus, of course, is that they get much cleaner and they start to lose their winter hair a little bit faster. With Scarlet beginning to look like a much more domesticated horse, it was time to start actually introducing a halter to her. Before I ever had a halter on Scarlet, she did understand giving to pressure. I could lead her around her little round pen to the left and right. The most scary part of Scarlet's halter training was her accepting all of the crazy things that I was doing. Skipping around her pen, or when I accidentally moved my arms in the wrong way, would set her off. This is a pretty boring part of horse training that has to get done if you want to get these flighty horses to calm down eventually. Finally, I managed to get her halter on for the very first time. Although this is a huge step, we still had a ton of work to do. Eventually, Scarlett got pretty used to all my shenanigans. She started getting a really shiny hair coat. I began working with her on lunging and picking up her feet. I introduced her to my canine companion, Huckleberry. She definitely started coming out of her shell a little bit more, and I just continued chipping away at her until we were able to get out into the bigger part of our round pen and continue with her training. After 30 days of solid halter training, this girl was a much different horse. She could lunge both directions in an open space. I could pick up her feet without any hassle. And she was really starting to understand how to ground tie. I spent the next few months just honing in her skill, getting her fed up, and continuing to see her blossom into a beautiful young horse. Eventually, Tiny introduced herself to Scarlett as well. Because Scarlett has really straight legs and almost perfect conformation, she really didn't need any corrective trimming. After a few more baths with soap, this girl began to sparkle like I thought she would when I very first saw her in the sale ring. I continued to refine all of the things that she already knew. Every session she would calm down just a little bit more until she was going around very relaxed in the round pen. I could move each one of her feet separately and change speeds. She started carrying herself in a more positive way. And this is when I really started to see her developing some more muscle. Every once in a while, she would get scared of something new, like a sponge that I was using she hadn't seen before. Because I had taken her training nice and slow, she was always pretty quick to come around. One thing that she did have a lot of trouble with was allowing me to take off her halter and put it back on. For many months she wore a halter pretty much 24/7, and I would put a new one on over top of the existing halter. She was extremely sensitive on her muzzle, but eventually with the help of treats she got better at that too. Compared to the horse I had purchased almost a year ago, she was beginning to look like a completely different filly. When we got to the year mark, I thought it was probably high time she got her own stall with a run in the barn for winter. It had been a bit of a struggle to get this girl to accept being in a stall.
Little girl.
She really did feel the most comfortable when she could see out into the horizon, something that is fairly common with most wild horses. Although she was a lot more calm than when I got her, she still could not find the courage to come into this stall on her own. We did a lot of training with this, but she just never really wanted to come inside. I decided to give this setup to another horse, and she could just come into her own regular stall in the winter. It can be a little bit tricky to get the horses worked during the Montana winter, but I made sure to take this girl out as often as I could just to refine her skills. She became really brave and sassy, but there were times when she would look at the world with the whites of her eyes. When it finally got way too cold for her to be working outside, she did get a bunch of time off in the winter. When it finally began to warm up again, she started spending a lot more time outside. She seemed to do really well anytime it was above around 20 degrees. She ate as much hay as I would put in front of her, drank lots of water, and really enjoyed her special wintertime mash.
Hey, girl.
Eventually, all of the snow that had accumulated over our Montana winter began to melt. With the promise of spring on the way, I got to calculating all of the things I was going to teach Scarlett this next summer. After having her for about 20 months, I began teaching her how to tie. All of my horses need to understand how to ground tie and lunge before I'll ever tie them to something solid. I started Scarlett out on one of these tie back rings, but she learned pretty quickly how to wiggle her way out of that. Eventually, she was really comfortable with being hard tied to a solid post.
Penny.
One thing that she did continue to have some trouble with was going in and out through doors. This can be a hard thing for a wild horse to wrap their minds around just because of the way their eyeballs are on their head. As they pass through the door, they can no longer see in front and behind them, and this makes it a little bit tricky if they are scared, like Scarlett. It's not really a huge deal, but it does need to be addressed when she scoots in and out of doorways. This mare also did have a tendency to try and escape from her pen while she was growing up, so she did wear a pink emergency identification collar for a lot of the time I had her this summer. Eventually, she got to hang out without any halter on when she got much easier to catch. With a lot of the big milestones completed, it was then time to start her in on her undersaddle training. Because she is a very sensitive girl, I decided to start off with a simple surcingle and just a regular pad. Given her reactive nature, she actually did much better than I anticipated. After conquering the surcingle and the saddle pad, eventually she would have to move on to carrying a regular saddle. I knew that this would be a little bit more difficult her, what with all of the little bits and pieces that a saddle has dangling from it. But after owning her for 22 months, I decided to see exactly how she would react. She became a lot more outgoing over the summer and really seemed to enjoy learning new things. It has been quite a while since I found something she is really afraid of. Given all of the time I've spent preparing her, I am feeling pretty confident that she will be able to tackle this next challenge without too much trouble. As I had anticipated, she did have quite a bit more trouble with all of the dangling straps hitting her at once. I didn't make a big deal out of it when she got really scared. I just went back in and continued to desensitize her to the saddle. Because of how scared she was, I decided not to saddle her up completely and just work on dangling the straps over her body until she stood perfectly still. Because Scarlett is so reactive, there is a high chance that if she were to completely lose her marbles when getting saddled for the first time, that she could very easily hurt herself. It is really important for these young, fractious horses that you don't accidentally hurt them throughout their training. Unfortunately, I do see this tend to happen more often than it should, and it will ruin a horse for a very long time.
Okay, little girl. Whoa.
In order to give Scarlett some of her confidence back, I put the surcingle back on her and decided to end our first saddling session.
That's a good girl.
Sometimes I'm really surprised what this girl can handle and what she cannot. As she continued to gain confidence, she turned into quite the character around the barn. When I sat down to make this video recently, I didn't realize how satisfying it would be to look back on this girl's journey. There were definitely some points along the way where I didn't know if she would ever turn into a calm and quiet horse. While we've made some pretty decent steps to get there, she does still have a long way to go. Recently, she really has started to come out of her shell. She looks for me every day to give her extra love and scratches, and of course a few treats every now and then. Recently, we have revisited the effort to get her into her own personal stall with a run for the winter. With Frisco Bill's help, she has really started to gain the confidence to tackle this very scary obstacle on her own. It is definitely a work in progress, and we will have to practice every single day until the snow flies. I was really only thinking this girl was going to get about 14 hands tall, but right now she sticks at a whopping 15. There have been a lot of ups and downs over the last 2 years. From a sickly little weanling to a gorgeous 2-year-old, this girl has blossomed into a fabulous looking mare. Even though her training has gone a lot slower than the average domestic horse, I think she's right on track for where I want her to be. I really don't have any plans of riding this little girl anytime soon, but am really hopeful that this winter we will spend some time working under saddle and learning the skills that she's gonna need when I eventually do swing a leg over her. Although she has cost me quite a bit more than my $25 investment, I think that it was definitely worth all of the time and energy I've put into her. At this point in time, I can't ever imagine sending this girl on to another home. Although she continues to move up in her training, I do think that she will be a hard horse for most people to get along with. Recently, I introduced her to a new friend that will hopefully get her to be a little more chill.
Zing!
This is Ziggy. He is an 18-year-old Arabian that I got from the same auction Scarlett came from. I've only had him about 6 months, but he has proven to be a super chill, calm guy that should do Scarlett a world of good. Sometimes accidental buys are the best buys after all. Scarlett has really pushed me to improve my horse training. It has now taken her 2 years to learn what some domestic horses can learn in a few days, but I really wouldn't have it any other way. I have so much more to do with this little girl over the next couple of years, and I hope you will subscribe so you can follow her journey. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.